Welcome to our webinar. I'm Bethany Patterson, part of the Learning Solutions team at Mapel. Mapel empowers hospitality with seamless staff management, learning, and compliance solutions. And our team specifically works on the learning part of that solution. And I'm head of learning experience here. I'm here speaking to Shelley Hopp, the founder of the Behaves Academy, and we're here to talk to you about behavioral science. So Shelley, what is behavioral science and how is it relevant?
So thank you for asking, because I think it's an important place to start. Behavioral science is the study of essentially human behavior and decision making. And it's an understanding of how we quite often make irrational decisions based on habitual thinking that's sort of ingrained through things that we've maybe learned earlier in life that perhaps aren't relevant anymore now. So it's all about how often the context that we find ourselves in influences our behavior much more than we believe. And it's sort of a way of thinking about this and how we might perhaps help people see around their blind spots and enable them to make better decisions.
This is a really apt topic, right? Because it's also what we're trying to do here within the learning content that we produce, is make sure that we're changing behaviors and making sure that people are doing things differently in the course of their work. So that's why it's a great conversation to have. You're the founder of the Behaves Academy. Could you tell us more about that? What is the Academy?
Yeah, sure. So the Behaves Academy is a training program that my team and I have developed to help, I suppose, mainly team leaders or anyone really with a business behavior they'd like to change, to provide them with a sort of pragmatic tool set to think that behavior change through using psychological insights. So in the Behaves Academy, we teach a process that you can follow, which is really practical and easy to use and not too academic and pie in the sky. And we also teach what a behavioral insight is. And we give you a toolkit of 14 really, really strong and common behavioral insights that you can start threading into your thinking about problem solving in the workplace.
With that practical framework that you've put together, what does that entail?
So it's a mixture of a process that you can follow. So especially if you're thinking about changing a specific behavior in the workplace, which many of us are, and that process is thinking about the behavior, the emotion, the hurdles holding people back from the behavior, actions you could take to get around that, and then thinking through how to verify that approach, how to evaluate it, and what systems it might impact, but also a kind of toolkit of psychological insights that you could think about applying to that process in order to strengthen it.
I think this is a really interesting area. Obviously, I come from the learning experience side of what we do in our business, and I've had the opportunity to go through the Behaves Academy as well. And I found it really interesting how much it is linked to what we do in learning design, especially around, I've said this to you, that we use action mapping by Kathy Moore, which is our kind of main framework for focusing in on what we're trying to do with performance support in our learning experience. And all we're trying to do within that action mapping is really focus in on what we want learners to do differently or to do better at the end of the learning experiences we put together. And that's all really, really linked into behavioral change, and then focusing in on those different insights or the barriers that they might face and things like that. So it ends up kind of linking in quite well.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing the course and saying kind things about it, first of all. But yes, always struck me how much this does seem to apply to learning design. And we have ended up using it in the same way, actually using it in learning design for clients that we work with as well. And talking to you has been really interesting about the parallels between the sort of generic behavioral psychology language and how they sort of directly map onto the learning science language as well.
It's all very much interlinked, right?
Very much so, yeah.
What we're trying to do ultimately, both with yourselves in the actual Behaves Academy, and then also what we're trying to do at Mapel, is help people do better at work. And whatever we can do in those spaces usually comes down to, tweaking little bits of behavior, or providing incentives, or, kind of looking at those insights and including them, or focusing in on those behaviors.
Absolutely. It's often about making people more comfortable, isn't it, with change as well?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of change management there. As part of this behaviors framework, it's really good to kind of talk through a potential example of how this could get used, right? And I know that one of the big apt topics that we have coming from customers recently is around preventing workplace sexual harassment. With the new legislation coming in, there's proactiveness that needs to occur. So, as we talk about workplace sexual harassment and how we would suggest interventions, or, um, items to help promote kind of behavior change, how would your team approach this?
Yes, when you mentioned to me that we might be talking about this topic, I think I had a few reservations. I was a little bit nervous about it. And the reason for that is that there are lots of things I can suggest, but I don't think it's any one behavior. I think it's all about creating a culture of psychological safety, actually. And a culture is really just a collection of behaviors. So it's something that we would need to think about from several angles. Um, just to run through what those angles are, I think there's a couple of different components. I think the main one would be creating some really clear policies and communicating them really, really well. Making sure that there is a very accessible and easy way for people to report issues, and one that they feel really safe using, possibly an anonymous one, which we have done with some of our clients in other industries. And then I think also strong management team training, so that the management team knows how to respond before they're asked to respond, if that makes sense.
So, going back to the framework, though, you said it was a process. What would be like the first step if you were working, if we came to you with a customer? What would be the first thing that you'd be trying to hone in on?
So I think we would maybe start. There's two main groups that I think we'd look at. One is the management or leadership team, and think about what behavior do we want from them. And then I think there's also the group of the employees themselves, and what behavior do we want from them, perhaps. I think with the employees, we would want them to feel super comfortable reporting anything that they see that they feel uncomfortable about. So we'd really want to think that through from the framework perspective. So the behavior we want is for them to report anything that they feel uncomfortable about, right? And the emotion that we want them to feel when they report is safe, right? Safe. This is safe for me to do. It's not going to result in me being persecuted or fired or anything like that. And then we would think about the hurdles. So what are the hurdles that are holding them back right now from doing this? Now, I'm not sure, you're the expert. You can possibly tell me what some of those hurdles might be. But I
Yeah.
would imagine, or actually, yeah, tell me, what do you think the hurdles might be?
Well, it's really interesting because I know you were saying as well around the feelings. Like, I think in some of the direction that we took, even internally, when we looked at our learner personas, and tried to speak to customers as well, is that feeling of empowerment as well. So rather than, there is a level of psychological safety in that, but also wanting to kind of put employees in the driving seat to, call this out, and to create a culture that is safer for themselves, um, and to help themselves and other colleagues. So we did also kind of look at, like, we wanted to really foster that feeling, that empowered feeling. Um, and then in behaviors as well, I know you said about, what they might be coming across. I think there is a certain level of hesitance. That barrier there would be a bit of hesitance of not wanting to kind of put your neck on the line potentially, or not feeling like you are the best person to step in. And so that's where we also brought in kind of that empowerment feeling to try to overcome that and give confidence and safety to be more open and to report more and to call things out and to be, more active rather than just bystander.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of the bystander effect, actually. It's funny you use that word. So, the bystander effect, for those who don't know, is a sort of psychological insight um, that occurs when kind of other people being present when you see something wrong happening makes you feel like you can't step forward, perhaps because, especially if no one else seems bothered by what's happening, there's a little bit of social proof in there as well. So if you see something that makes you uncomfortable, but it's not just you, there's 5 other people standing around and nobody says anything, you think, oh, well, if everyone else is okay with this, then maybe I should be okay with this as well. Maybe I don't want to make a fuss. Um, so I think sort of encouraging people to maybe even educating people about what the bystander effect is. And I think particularly giving them an anonymous way of reporting it. Like some clients I've worked with have, for example, an anonymous form or an anonymous helpline where you can phone in or write in and say what made you uncomfortable without having to say your name, but maybe mentioning the situation. So it may be obvious that you are one of 5 people. But then I think if those people can be encouraged and celebrated instead of made to feel like they're making a fuss unnecessarily, that's quite a strong way of encouraging that culture.
Yeah. I find it interesting as well in this is one of the aspects that has come up both within the legislation and then directly is customers and the effect that customers' behaviors might have then on the team. And although it wasn't included as part of the legislation changes, it's still a big focus for hospitality industries of how do they respond to third party occurrences. And one of the big focuses that we tried to aim for as well is to provide tools or things to say to help employees be a bit more confident to respectfully make it known that behaviors are not okay, especially from a third party.
I can understand that. That's really tricky, isn't it? Because they may have also been told that the customer is always right, and then here's the customer doing something that's not right. It's really tricky,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's a bit of a conflicting message, perhaps.
Yeah. So how, within that being kind of a barrier, how do you see something as part of the framework? How would you kind of try to combat that?
I think in the framework where I think about the hurdles, and for me, one of the hurdles might be perhaps confusion about, oh, how do I tackle a customer who I'm supposed to be making happy? That's my goal, is to make the customer happy, and now they're doing something inappropriate. It creates a really weird, a really difficult situation actually for the staff member, I can imagine. I think some of the actions that come to mind is just as you say, is that training to make them understand that the company supports them and is behind them in speaking out and saying this is not okay. You see it actually on the tube, don't you? On the public transport. When you're riding around public transport, you see signs sort of saying, if you're rude to our staff, we will support our staff.
Yeah.
And I think that hospitality workers need to have that same assurance really from their leadership that, what is deemed unacceptable and the confidence to tackle it head on, perhaps.
And how could they do that? Like, how would they provide those anchors to help make sure that message is a part of the culture?
Well, I think using the insights in behaves, the one that immediately comes to my mind is messenger effects. So I think if they have sort of something from the CEO saying, I personally find this unacceptable, and I want you to let me know, I want you to let your manager, your line manager, know when this is happening, will be really powerful. It would be also very powerful if the line manager reinforces that, because sometimes if there's incongruence between the leadership, that can also be very confusing, I think. And then it'll be a bit of an incremental thing, I think, because there's a little bit of, you mentioned norms earlier, there's a little bit of social proof and norms in there, in that if they see that, oh, when I speak out about this, I'm supported, other people will see that, and then a little bit of social proof will creep in, and people will immediately think, oh, this is a new norm now. This is unacceptable, and it's okay to talk about it, because when other people talk about it, I see how they are treated, and that then makes me feel safe to come forward. So I think it's a little bit of a mixture of strong messengers and consistency, and then eventually the social proof element will creep in. What do you think? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I'm only kind of smiling because I think the interesting part of how it links into learning design and also kind of what we tried to do is quite a few of the things that you're saying we've in a subtle way included in our learning resource. So we do actually have some branching activities where people are the learner in this case is empowered to help the people that are experiencing something make different decisions or call things out, and then also seeing then the effects or consequences of that. So it almost provides that safety for them to make different decisions and see the effect, but also then that practical element of remembering, okay, this is, I can in a respectful way combat this or report this, and we're giving them those tools to do so. And
Yeah, I
there's
think they need the tools and the scripts, really, don't they?
yeah, yeah,
They, because using their own words, especially if you're feeling emotional, can be hard. But if you have
yeah,
been given, like you say in your training course, if you've sort of said, well, you could say this, couldn't you? And you have that in the back of your mind, it's really helpful that you don't have to think of that yourself in the moment.
yeah. And the onus as well we have is that their response is backed up internally as well. So it's almost they're kind of playing out a potential situation using characters within our resource so that it's, you know, a bit safer for them to make different decisions or try things out. But those characters are also then backed by their manager as that secondary piece to provide that culture, that wider view. And in terms of also reporting, we really focused on helping people to think about what they would need to help investigations be fair and equitable, um, and giving them kind of tools to do so as well, both on both sides, people who've experienced something and people who have been accused as well. So we're really trying to provide that that kind of accountability to everyone to be an active part into making the culture better and to also making sure that this doesn't happen on a regular basis.
Yeah, that it becomes a norm, that it's really unacceptable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And people think, oh, if I do this, I will immediately be called out, and so maybe I'm not going to do it in the first place.
Yeah. And also to do so in a safe and more productive manner as well. So I think about one of the examples that we went through is we have a character on the first page as a way of the learner kind of deciding between the different types of harassment that can occur.
Mhm.
The learner is helping decide if this character is crossing the line or not. This poor, unfortunate character who tends to keep doing things that are right toe to the line. So the learner is deciding what harassment that it constitutes and then if they've done something wrong. And I think ultimately they always are doing something wrong. But it's providing that kind of awareness as well and challenging assumptions.
Oh, now you've said that, you've actually reminded me. I wanted to talk a little bit about framing as well. I think framing is quite important in this debate because I think some of us the perceptions may be shifting at this point in time in our society, aren't they? So you've mentioned a character who has some misadventures, and we have to say whether he or she is over the line or not. Um, and I think there may be a range of opinions really on what is and what isn't acceptable. But what it sounds to me like you're doing, which is really, really valuable, is providing the framing of what is and isn't acceptable now, so that people have that, as you say, that new awareness, that new context, to help form those new norms that we're in the process of forming.
Yeah, I think our focus definitely was to ensure best practice, best culture, best responses all the way through. And so everything is within the frame of, everything, even if it feels like it's only on the line, it's still not okay, which is what we kind of did with that example. So, in terms of the behaves framework with this topic, is there anything that you can advise for our hospitality listeners of things they can think about, um, or ways they can approach this topic internally?
Yes, I think maybe just think through some of the things we've touched on today. So, um, which messengers do you have delivering the message to your staff about what is and what is not acceptable? Think really carefully about which are the most appropriate messengers and how to use them in the best possible way. Think about how to reinforce the messages, because this job is never done. It's not something you can take off the to-do list. You have to keep reinforcing over and over again, because culture is constantly in progress, right? It's constantly forming and reforming, and so you you have to be vigilant about this. And it's important to think through your messengers and how you use them. Also think about the framing. So what is and is not acceptable in your organization. Define it really carefully and make sure that everyone is aware. And then think carefully about how to reinforce the using social proof, those norms that you do want to put in place. So that's things like rewarding and celebrating people who come forward and report things that they have seen happen to others or have happened to them. Celebrate managers who are really decisive and quick and deal with this in the way that you would like them to, because this again creates that new norm that people will look around themselves and see, oh, this is what it's like to be here, to work here. I think that would be really helpful to help create this new norm that we're all trying to create.
And I think it's definitely a possibility to do it in a digital manner as well. So, I mean, I know at Mapel, we have the ability to have suggestion boxes that are fully anonymous. We have news feeds that can update staff on any new regulations. And even with a resource like ours, which we've put together for general employees, if there's further information or policies or even manager tools that need to be trained on, those can all go as part of a collection to really ensure a learner has everything that they absolutely need to know at the various different audience touch points to help ensure that your business is taking proactive steps. And there's also abilities for recognition and reward in a safe manner.
Absolutely. I think that, as you say, a digital way of reporting things that you feel uncomfortable with can be really effective, because it can make everyone feel quite safe in the process. And I think there's some other clients that I've worked with who have a sort of digital form that you can fill in if you feel uncomfortable about something, and you're completely welcome to report anything at all at any time. And then they have a independent investigations team who are not connected to the business or the politics of what's going on in the business at all, who come in and investigate all sides of the story. And showing that commitment, I think, is a really strong, visible sign that you're taking this issue really, really seriously.
And just bringing it back to the behaves framework as well, I know we've talked about it specifically with workplace sexual harassment for this example, but the behaves framework can be used on all sorts of different behaviors that you're trying to focus on. I know, Shelley, you and I have talked about timesheet filling in, or even things like trying to get sales across the board. So in terms of your framework, how would you suggest people kind of use this or think about behavioral science going forward?
Well, I think they should think about behavioral science as a really valuable tool that they could use to help them influence people in the ways that we're talking about. Like, how can we get them to, for example, maybe use the anonymous reporting form or use their timesheet tool or whatever it is. So, if I can give the Behaves Academy a little plug, you can check out what you will learn in the different modules on behaves.works. And essentially, we will teach you a series of steps that you can go through where you think through the problem step by step, and 14 insights that you can apply to the problem. So we've talked about some of them today. We've talked about messenger effects, framing, social proof, but there's many others included in there as well, which you could go into in a bit more depth. So that includes things like timing, anchoring, friction. So what might be holding people back, like things like choice overload, risk aversion, loss aversion, reciprocity, all sorts of things like that. And depending on the behavior that you're trying to change, different insights may be more useful than others. And so it's just a good way of getting to know them and learning which ones are useful in this situation, which ones may be useful in another situation, and then having them really at your disposal to help you work through your sort of challenges.
And I've gone through it, and we within Mapel, and especially within our learning design, are definitely on board and use quite a few of the insights, even if we use a different vocabulary to describe them. Thank you so much, Shelley, for walking through the framework and telling us about the Behaves Academy in further detail. If there's any further information people want to know, we'll provide some details at the end. But where can people find you if they want to learn more?
They can find us at behaves.works, but also you can look for me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name. I think I'm the only Shelley Hop on there. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions at all. And thank you so much for having me as well.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm Bethany Patterson. You can also find me within Mapel, but also on LinkedIn if you want to continue the conversation as well. Thank you again for coming. It's been very interesting to learn a little bit more about behavioral science to support us in our roles.